All right, everyone, welcome to today's Talk with Doc. It is my honor to have two amazing ladies with us today, Lisa Mattheiss and Stephanie Hubach. And today is a very timely topic. Our topic today is preventing exhaustion and burnout. And this is perfect, not just for ministry leaders, but for families as well. And so we'll be getting into a lot of that. But before we dive into that, let me have our guests introduce themselves. So Steph, why don't you first kick us off and introduce yourself?
Sure. I live in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, so the home of the Amish. So I live on a house on a dirt road here in Lancaster, but I work for Covenant Seminary in St. Louis. So I am I beam myself out there from time to time in person, but most of my work is done from here. And I was the founding director of M&A Special Needs Ministries, which is the Presbyterian Church in America's ministry. I got into this world because we have a son with Down syndrome, Tim, who's going to be 30 in January, which is hard to believe. So anyway, I love working with churches and working with families, and I really like what I'm getting to do now in terms of mentoring ministry leaders, doing a little bit more research and writing, and helping pastors and counselors to be right at the seminary level to catch a vision for this before they actually start their work. So I've also written a couple of books, the latest one being Same Lake, Different Boat, which I wrote in 2006 and re-released in 2020 with several new chapters. And then one that just came out in October called Parenting and Disabilities, Abiding in God's Presence. And that's a 31-day devotional for parents. So.
And great book. I recommend everyone get both of them, actually. So yeah. All right. Thanks for being with us. Lisa, your turn.
Well, I started ministry when I was in high school. I've been doing children and family ministry at some level for about 30 years now. But 22 years ago, God gave us a child with significant special needs. Emily has spina bifida and hydrocephalus, and has accumulated a couple dozen different diagnoses. And so it kind of launched us into a different world of ministry. And special needs ministry within our local church turned into a nonprofit 501c3 special needs ministry that is now 19 years old. And I have been on staff here at Christ First Church for a little over 4 years now, building another special needs ministry here inside the church, even as I continue to train churches in the area and work with AWANA clubs and others in the region.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you to both of you for being here. You are perfect for this talk, being both parents and ministry leaders. With this, you're going to be the right person for both of these, and I likewise share the same hat with you guys with that. So let's not waste any time. There's so much for us to talk about. And first, let me just throw out to any of our attendees, whether you're on with us here on Zoom, and we've got a few of you, or if you're watching live on Facebook Live, you can put your questions in the chat on Zoom or on Facebook in the comment section. I'm watching for those, and we'll answer those here live as we're going through everything. But I think one of the first things I think would be really good is, before we get too far into things, how about we just get some definitions out there so we can understand everything. So the two big terms we hear a lot are burnout is one of them, and then compassion fatigue. Can you guys talk about those, and how do you actually define that?
Lisa, you want to do that one?
Well, I'll kind of summarize. When we do this workshop, Stephanie's got a really good description, but really it boils down to burnout is just an overloading. It is just the sheer volume of demands that accumulates over time. So when you think about all of the things involved in caregiving for a child with a disability, you add on top of that ministry, add on top of that a profession, there really becomes a a physical exhaustion based on a continual high level of performance that's necessary. It's about all of the things that you do that really build up to a point where you just can't do anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the things we did in the workshop was we talked about burnout and compassion fatigue, and how compassion fatigue is actually, if you think about it, a subset of burnout, right? It's a type of burnout that's specific to caregivers. So one way to think about it is sometimes if you go out and read anything much about burnout online or whatever, burnout is more described in an occupational context. And for us who are parents of kids with disabilities, often caregiving becomes our occupation, right? In that sense, right? So whether you're a disability ministry leader or a parent, there's an occupational element, right, to that. But then the caregiver fatigue has a more relational dimension to it. So one of the things that we had put together in our workshop, if you're okay if I jump into this, Lisa, was that distinction, well, not a distinction, just a side-by-side comparison of how are burnout and compassion fatigue different, and then how in caregiving as a parent of a child with special needs, and especially if you're also in ministry as well, how do those things actually create this potentially really toxic mix, right? And I want to say too, before I get into going through this chart, was just the idea that I don't think Lisa will mind me saying this, but we both have learned what we've learned out of our shared failed experiences, right? This isn't I got it right, so I want you to get it right. It's I got it wrong. I would love to spear.
I think we can all say that,
right? So if you think about both burnout and compassion fatigue, like in two channels here, right? The issue behind burnout tends to be more occupational overloading, right? Versus in compassion fatigue, it's relational overexposure, right? So occupational overloading versus relational overexposure. The source of the burnout or the compassion fatigue for the burnout, it's a quantity of demands, right? Volume of demands. So this could be in any job, right? You could just have so many more tasks than any human being can do. In compassion fatigue, it's the quality of the suffering, not just the quantity of the tasks, right? The result that happens when you experience burnout is performance exhaustion when it's burnout, when it's more occupation oriented. The result in compassion fatigue is more emotional exhaustion, right? The pain, and there's pain experienced in both, right? In burnout, it tends to be more a depleted self in terms of a depleted performer, right? For compassion fatigue, it tends to be a depleted helper or a depleted co-sufferer. The response to burnout tends to be guilt, or quitting, just quitting, right? I mean, and you've seen this post-COVID, wherever we are in COVID, right? You've seen this in the world today in jobs, where people just jumping ship, right?
right?
Whereas in caregiver or compassion fatigue, it's more the need for rest or retreat. And the healing and burnout comes from treatment and then reordering your world, right? From a compassion fatigue, it's more in the area of healing from being able to retreat from responsibility, and then a theological repurposing, right? Reorienting yourself around the gospel and the scriptures in terms of your tasks at hand. So I know that's kind of a lengthy thing to do without a picture in front of you, but I think it gives you a little bit of the feeling of the contrasts and the differences, and yet and for caregiving of parents of kids with special needs, there's both the vocational, right, and a relational dimension of both of these that comes into play. And that chart, to be fair, came from compassion fatigue, spiritual exhaustion, and the cost of caring in pastoral ministry on a website. So I found it extremely helpful to help distinguish these two things.
No, that's excellent. Thank you. So we've now discussed kind of what that is. I think some of our people may be listening here going, well, I might have some of that. What are some of the signs of burnout and some of the signs of compassion fatigue?
You want me to run into those, Lisa? You want to go? Why don't you do that, Lisa?
Okay, I think it looks different for different people. I mean, Stephanie and I have both had our kind of crash and burn moments. And, look, as we talk about what was our trigger that told us that we had reached that point, it was different. For me, it was winding up in an ER one night at 3:00 in the morning, and with all kinds of heart issues and blood pressure issues and other health issues that couldn't be explained. I spent 11 hours in ER and nobody could explain what was happening with my body. And so that was kind of my wake up call. But as I began to pursue answers and talked with a doctor who actually knew not just me, but knew my family, knew my ministry, he gave me a lot of other insights that a lot of things that I was dealing with that I thought was just because I turned 40 were actually related to exhaustion. So, I had chest pains and my heart was skipping beats and racing. I had blood pressure issues, sleeping issues, memory issues, cognitive processing issues. My immune system was lowered. I was catching a lot of things that I didn't normally catch. And then there was a level of apathy and almost depression and anger in certain situations that I was not used to dealing with. Even frustration toward people that I knew couldn't help what was happening, people I cared for, pastors I worked with, just things that were out of the ordinary for me. But until I had somebody take all of those things and put them together in a package, I didn't really understand that all of those things were actually signs and symptoms.
Yeah, if I had to summarize it in 3 words, Lisa, I think you would probably agree with this. It was stop needing me. Right? Stop needing me. Stop needing me at work. Stop needing me. Stop needing me at school. Stop needing me. Right. And it was really a terrible feeling because, if you're have generally been a cheerful giver, right? All of a sudden you feel like this sort of very angry and unpleasant and cynical side starts to come out. And for me, it was just this total feeling of emptiness. I never felt, it was absolutely, I've always been able to put in one more shovelful and push one more time with my foot to dig one more thing I needed to do, right? And it was just like hitting absolute concrete with the shovel. And I just can't explain, it's very difficult for me to articulate the level of emptiness that I felt. I guess absolute void. I literally ended up taking a sabbatical, and I told a friend of mine afterwards, I said, I sat in a chair for a month. I mean, I literally sat in a chair for a month. Yeah. Well, what else did you do? I sat in a chair for a month, right? I mean, it was that bad. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize how, burnout and compassion fatigue can really affect us physically. Yeah. With that. And, that happens so many times that, we just think, oh, I'm just tired. Mm-hmm. Or I've got a virus, I've got a cold or something. But it's when it continues and goes on. And I'd say, one added thing, kind of going along with all that is when all of a sudden you find yourself not enjoying what you enjoy doing. Yeah. It really does go along the lines of depression with that. And it's very closely related with it. So it's something we really need to think about, it can affect you at home, not just with, your kids and the relationship then with your kids, definitely, being the caregiver, taking care of the individual, your child or whoever it is that you're caring for. But it can also, if you're married, it can affect that relationship with spouse, can affect intimacy, just everything. So everything's on the board here with it. And so many times we just completely forget about that. And so it's a topic that people don't like to talk about a lot because it's so personal, but it's something that happens so often with it that we really need to be aware of it. And, I think, there's some things that that really, help set up burnout and set up compassion fatigue, especially for our disability ministry leaders. What might be some things that can help increase some of the likelihood. I don't know if I'm asking that right, or if you know what I'm asking. But what can generate burnout and compassion fatigue when you are a ministry leader?
Lisa, you want to go with that?
There's a list.
Yeah.
There's a lack of balance. For me, there was a lack of understanding Sabbath, and just, my definition of Sabbath was leaving this to go over here and do something else. It was a break from ministry, but I was still doing something else or being something to someone else. And I had to really learn what Sabbath was, and that I needed to literally stop doing things.
Yeah.
I began to take 2 and 3 days at a time where I would just go out of town and take a respite retreat. If I was out of town, I would just tell people I was going out of town. Where before I was on 24/7, 365. There was no off button. I didn't turn my phone off. I have learned to set hours for myself where I do certain things and allocate time for certain things, whether it is rest, whether it's Bible study, whether it's time with my family. I've learned to set boundaries. So, not setting boundaries is definitely something that will lead to it. I didn't take care of my physical body. I ate most of my meals in the front seat of my van going somewhere, and when you eat like that, it has long-term consequences. I had a consistent schedule that was packed full all the time. I did not sleep because I always had stuff to do. So I had to learn to allocate time to sleep. I always invested in my family's health and made sure that they ate right and made sure they had supplements and vitamins and things like that, but I never did that for myself.
Yeah.
So I had to learn to do that for myself. Never saying no. I had to learn to say no. And I had to resign from several positions. I probably hold fewer positions now than I ever have. For probably 20 years. Learning the right yeses and the right nos was something I had to do. And, we hear lots of family stories, and a lot of times we take the responsibility for that as a ministry leader, and we feel like, we have to be the savior and fix it all. But one of the things that probably put off my crash and burn as long as it was put off is that the Lord kind of taught me earlier on that those families didn't belong to me. They belonged to Him. And there was a period of time they crossed my path and I had a role to play. But then I would sit down at night and think about all the families that I had dealt with during the day and talked to, and all of their struggles, and really visualize myself putting them back in the lap of Christ and saying, all right, God, I did my part. Now they're yours. Yeah. When I need to do something again, let me know. And so that is a practice that I continue doing. And it's probably one of the things that I've not always done perfectly, but done more right. But there's a lot of things that will lead to this point. Trying to do it all in our own strength. This is not our ministry. God doesn't need us. He chooses to use us, but He doesn't need us. And sometimes we forget that.
Yeah, one way I like to think about it, at least Doc has said, two basic things which any of us would agree are true, right? we can't do it. We can't do everything, and we can't absorb everyone's pain, right? There's two things, right? And yet, if you think about burnout, in some ways, one way to think of that is trying to do everything. And then, and if you're involved in the church transformation activity, which any disability ministry tends to be a real work of church transformation, which is something you can't control, right? It's a work of the Spirit, and yet you can be certainly God's agent in that. And it's a very exasperating right, kind of dance in some ways, because you're really very slowly leading people through a process at the rate they can absorb it, right? And dealing with all the conflict, right, that often arises out of that. So there's that on the one side. And that can happen in even the most supportive church, right? Because you're trying to change church culture, right? Which threatens everybody, right? And then on the other side, right, the idea you can't absorb everybody's pain is if you're in ministry of compassion, or you're a parent, right, and you live a life of compassion, caregiving, right, towards your child, some of us are more resilient and better emotionally equipped for that journey out of the gate than others are. And others of us have to learn more what to do with the volume of pain that comes our way. I think one of the things that really surprised me when I first started my job at M&A back in 2007 was that the first year I was on staff there, the volume of phone calls I got from parents who had waited their lifetime for this ministry, right? And story after story after story. And I wasn't prepared. It wasn't bad. It was a good thing. It was important to hear, right? But I wasn't emotionally prepared. I was ready to go do stuff, right? And I had to sit for a while and take in this, and then try to learn how to navigate the volume of emotions, right, that can come our way. So, does that make sense? That this too?
Absolutely. And you know what, I'll throw out on top of it. I literally just had this discussion with a disability ministry leader yesterday, and I'll speak for all disability ministry leaders. I know we all have the heart to do as much as we can for our families, because we all have a huge heart for them. We love them. We want to help them. On top of it, and I think we've already mentioned it here, many disability ministry leaders are parents and families themselves on top of it. So, and I think Lisa, you're the one, we're kind of carrying the candle, burning the candle at both ends already with that. So, sometimes we're kind of taken away from our family to try to serve other families, which leads to more burnout, more compassion fatigue as well. But the one thing in particular, like yesterday, this disability ministry leader I'm working with, she's been doing a great job trying to build up volunteers to take on more things. And that's what we all have to do. I always say we have to replace ourselves, try to find people to replace ourselves. Not that we don't do the work, right, but just so that we can share the work and take some of that pressure off of us. But she was super excited because, they've got, services midweek every week, and she has to do that and has special things to do. But then all of a sudden, she had the next 6 weeks coming up that the church wasn't going to be doing those Wednesday night services. She was ecstatic. She's like, oh, I can breathe. I'm going to do something with my kids and focus on that. And she's like, I'm now so looking forward to it. But then they just announced, oh, we're going to do a special 8-week course. It's going to be 2 nights a week on top of it. And then,
forbid we should have white space.
Exactly. And then one of her family signed up to attend it, and they need a buddy for that. And so they're contacting her. Well, my first question for her is, does the children's ministry handle all the childcare for the children's? Yeah. She goes, no, they have childcare, coordinator that does that. I go, the childcare coordinator needs to do it for our families with special needs too. They can handle it better. You can recommend people, but you can get that off your plate. And we have to just think smarter and work better sometimes. And sometimes in our world of disability, and I'll be the first to admit, Doc Hunsley, am guilty of this. we don't like to delegate. We think we need to do it all ourselves. And sometimes we think, well, maybe they can't do it as well, or they don't know what to do. So we just take care of it ourselves. That's not the way for us to think.
Right.
And as a parent, I'll come into the parent now. As a parent, so many times our friends don't know what's going on in our life and don't realize that we need help because we don't ever tell them and we don't ever ask them. So, in both instances, whether you're a ministry leader or you're a parent, a lot of this is just thinking smarter and literally asking for help as we kind of go through all this. So, kind of going into the next phase, then, we're kind of jumping around here.
Doc, can I throw in 2 more quick thoughts there?
Please do.
Now that I've just derailed your thinking process.
No, you're good.
I was just going to say, just one of it too, is just one thing is just becoming, and I hate to use the word comfortable, but I don't know what other word to use. Becoming comfortable with unmet needs, right? In any aspect of ministry, pick a ministry, any ministry.
Yes.
In the world, we are finite people in a world that is affected by brokenness everywhere, right? And so we're conduits of God's grace, but we are not actually God's grace, right? And so really remembering that our ultimate goal is to point people to Christ. And I don't say that in some just give them a verse and walk away thing. That's not what I mean.
Right.
But we're to direct people that their deepest need is for Christ, and to direct them back to Christ, direct ourselves back to Christ, right? As we minister to them, and allow ourselves to be a conduit of God's grace, but not be we're not the ones that are in charge of outcomes, right? God does outcomes. We do obedience, right? And so I think that's it's easy to get off. It's easy to lose your perspective on that, I think.
Very easy.
Yeah.
Well, Steph, if I could have you just kind of go on, I know you've talked about, kind of fueling your core engine, with things, and keep finding that fuel source that what is it you said, helps with your temperament.
Yeah.
Can you kind of go into that?
Sure. I think this is something I don't think I really ever consciously thought about until after I went through a burnout. I was like, well, where does the fuel of my life actually come from? And one of the things I think I became aware of so if you think of burnout as the jet engine of a plane, losing its power, right? And it's like this descent, right? So I can look back prior to my burnout and see that the descent was happening well a year before the plane and God's kindness landed without exploding into 1,000 pieces. But what I looked at was, where was I getting my fuel, right? And the more desperate as the descent starts to get down, the more we start scrambling for fuel. We need fuel, right? And so I found myself finding it in the affirmation of other people, right? Start getting it in the wrong. I started getting my fuel from the wrong places. So you get enough likes on a talk on Facebook. You get enough people that are giving you feedback about your book. You get any of those kind of things. That was the stuff that was energizing me to keep going, rather than actually marinating in the love of God for me in Christ, and that being the fuel by which I couldn't help but want to do what I do to bring other people to Christ. I mean, it's such a different thing, right? And once I realized how this humanly generated false form of fuel was actually becoming toxic to me, because I was actually losing sight of the real fuel out of which God wanted me to operate. So that's the gist of it, I think.
Yeah, that's great. So, we're talking about that. It's definitely important we find that kind of our inner core. How can we become resilient? And, I guess, like a better word, try to prevent burnout, prevent compassion fatigue here. Lisa, why don't you jump on that?
Okay. One of the resources that Stephanie actually introduced me to that I wish I would have found years ago is a book called Resilient Ministry. And it was put together by Tasha Chapman and Bob Burns, Donald Guthrie. And it's directly related to pastors, but I was able to find a lot of things in there. Some of the things I had learned the hard way. But, you know, first of all, really looking at what are the habits that I have, and are those habits contributing positively or negatively? You know, am I intentional about things, or am I doing things just because it's the way I've always done them? And maintaining accountability. Once I realized what was the right thing to do, I had 2 or 3 years where things started looking better. And then when I joined the staff of this church and added, you know, now I'm caregiver, now I'm ministry director of a nonprofit, and now I'm church ministry leader. Okay. And I went into that thinking intentionally, I want to do certain things to make sure that I protect, you know, myself and my time. And then life happens, and you're not quite as intentional. And I started going south again, but I had put people in my path that helped hold me accountable. And one of them just looked at me one day and said, "So you're telling me," I was justifying decisions I was making. And she looked at me and she said, "So what you're telling me is that you know the right thing to do and you're not doing it. So basically you're committing suicide a day at a time, and you're going to sit there and justify that to me?" Mm-hmm. Oh, ouch, ow. Yeah. But I so needed to hear that. And it was a wake up call for me. And I was really thankful that she was part of my life, and that she felt like she could tell me that, and really, really remind me of what I knew, so that I would do what I knew to do. And I think really having an accurate theology of both ourselves and who we are, and understanding that I am not my calling. You know, I am me. I am a child of God. I also have a job to do. I am called to do certain things, but, you know, kind of like Steph's situation, I don't want myself to get caught up in, I don't know who I am, because it's all about what I do. Mm-hmm. And making sure that we keep both of those things separate and have a clear understanding of both of those, but also have a clear understanding of the role of the hard things in our life. They don't make us, but God uses them to grow us. Mm-hmm.
That's good.
And, you know, just taking time. Sometimes we get involved in things that we are just doing, and we forget about the being part and spending time with Christ. So some of the spiritual disciplines that, you know, we used to do, the reflection and the prayer, and, you know, the being still and knowing part, we give that up for activity. And, you know, one of the gifts of being on staff as a church is that I have keys, you know, and so I can come into an empty sanctuary and just sit and just spend time in prayer and worship. And that was something that I never really took time to do in the first part of my ministry. But I have learned to do probably in the last 10 years or so. And it's been such a gift. And, you know, really evaluating what my purpose is. It's really easy for our ministry to become an idol. And I'm human. I can think that God can't do this thing without me, you know, but I have to remind myself that he chooses to use me, but he doesn't need me.
Mhm.
Amen.
And that helps, you were talking about delegating. That's where, it helps us sometimes kind of let go of some of those things and delegate to other people when we realize that, I'm just one of the tools that God uses. I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned earlier there, Lisa, I think, I know for me, it was a big area that I missed. And you said finding your Sabbath.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
for any ministry leader out there, I want to really hit on that one real
Mhm.
quick, that you need to find your Sabbath. Because, when I was on staff, we had services Saturday and Sunday. So pretty much I got Saturday morning off. Saturday afternoon, evening was gone. All day Sunday was gone. And then I had Monday off, but my wife worked. My kids are in school. So I ended up staying home and doing work anyways. And I didn't take it as a Sabbath. I just did extra work because we always have work to do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, without realizing it, that just helped drive me more into burnout.
Mhm.
Because I wasn't taking that Sabbath for me. I wasn't just going out and just sitting in a chair for a month, which is so needed sometimes. Just maybe even just sitting and, binging Netflix for a day, just getting your mind off things, but doing something where you're not doing the work. But we need to do that. That's vitally important. And then, you nailed it, to help us with all this, we have to keep Christ in the center of it. We have to make sure the one thing we never give up is our quiet time, whether we're a ministry leader or parent. That's, for me, that's what keeps me sane,
Mhm.
is my time with God. And so that can really help balance things for us as well.
And sometimes I think, talking about Sabbath and taking time apart, I looked at it like, well, I can't take a day. The first thing my doctor said to me was, you need a 6-month sabbatical from life and ministry. And I laughed because it's just not a reality. But he spent a lot of time with me really, okay, what can you do? And he started with, okay, outline your day, find 10 minutes that you can do something, and find 5 minutes that you can stop. Can you stop your car while you're eating your food in the front seat of your car? Can you stop it in a parking lot and just sit there and eat without driving too? It's those little things that I thought he was crazy, but after a period of time of doing many of those little things, I realized it really did make a difference. And so I think sometimes when people hear, well, take a respite, they think of large quantities of time, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can be 5 minutes here and 10 minutes here and 30 minutes over here. And it really does make a difference.
Yeah.
I think the accountability is huge too, that Lisa talked about. That was one of the biggest healing things for me. I had a group of, I believe, 5 women that I connected with who were all ministry leaders in different capacities, not all disability ministry, but different pathways, right? But I knew either understood burnout experientially or understood how to avoid it. Right? And so they were a huge help to me. I mean, a huge help, and they still are, because we went pretty deep, right, during those months. And so they still circle around and go, so that speaking schedule you got going, it's looking tight. Are you thinking? Right. And so that's been really, because I didn't have, I had a couple of good friends locally on the ground who were frantically waving to me as my plane was coming down, going, stop, right? And I just waved back like, hey guys. And so, but I think I listen better now. I have a larger group of people, and the ones who were already had my back, I listen to now. So
ladies, we've got a question that came in. I'm going to go ahead and pull in now because I think it's perfect timing and can help us going into our next part here. our friend says she's a mom of 4 kids, 2 with special needs. And she feels, as you said, Steph, that her plane is about to crash.
Mhm.
She never has time for herself,
Yeah.
and feels like a failure if she has to ask for help from others, and as a failure as a parent.
Yeah.
And her question is, what do I do to be able to help myself, help my kids, and not crash and burn?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the first thing, I mean, awareness like that is huge, right? Of course, in any situation. Then reaching out to some people around you, some trusted friends and family members, including a spouse if she's married, right? To say, I'm in trouble. Like, I'm not whining here. I'm in trouble, right? And this will end badly, and it can end very badly, right? It's good. It will end badly if we don't intervene. And like Lisa said, intervening doesn't have to be 100% or 0, right? And that's what we tend to think in these black and white terms sometimes. If I can't get this level of help, then I won't take any. And it's like, no, there's a whole spectrum in between, right? So we've got to let the pressure valve off somewhere before the pot blows, right? Or before all the liquid drains out and there's nothing in there. And that takes a very long time to rebuild it. So, I would definitely recommend sitting down, spouse, some trusted friends, maybe your pastor, whoever is in your trusted circle of people who understand your world at some level, care about you, and will point you to Christ and have your back. So I know that sounds very simple, but I mean, honestly, that's, if you cannot or will not make yourself that vulnerable, you will not be able to get the kind of help that you need. And it's not, and the other thing is not letting that's a lie from the pit of hell that says that if you ask for help, you are somehow a failure. And so really responding to those lies that we tell ourselves, right? And saying that's not true at all. Jesus constantly pulled back from the crowds, right? And in his darkest moment, he cried out to God, right, to remove the cup. Right. I mean, it says, Jesus asked for help, and we certainly, finite fallen creatures that we are, right, desperately need help so much more, right? So yeah, it's really okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's kind of jump into that, because I think that can be another area where we can really help prevent burnout and compassion fatigue, and that's with self-care. That's an area that most of the time parents, especially parents of individuals with special needs or disabilities, put to the wayside and just forget about. We sacrifice ourselves to take care of our kids, but we really need self-care. So how can we implement self-care, and why is that so important?
Lisa, I think you're better at this than I.
For me, it was 5 minutes at a time. I mean, really and literally. I actually took my schedule and put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and I color coded it. And I'm like, okay, here's 5 minutes. I can do this differently. Here's 10 minutes. I can do this. I can, with where I am here in Northwest Georgia, I drive right through the Chickamauga battlefield. I can choose to stop in the battlefield, roll my windows down, turn the engine off for 10 minutes right here and eat my lunch there. Yes, I'm coming from something and I'm going to something, but I can stop right here. And then, I can take a few minutes to, walk in the sanctuary or kneel in the sanctuary and spend 5 or 10 minutes here before I start my day. My devotional time is usually when I get home at night, it's midnight. I can choose to do this here. I can use my drive time. I've learned, I asked God for more time to pray, and then he sent me to a church 30 minutes away. So like, really, God? And he's like, well, you asked for more time with me. I've just given it to you. It just didn't look like you thought. But just taking the time that you spend in the car and spending that time with the Lord and praying and giving him those things and praising him for the things, sometimes our mindset, is about all of the things that are difficult and hard. But when we concentrate on those things that are going well and where we see God's fingerprints, that's something I talk to my family about. Where are God's fingerprints in this situation? And I can recount those to him and spend time in gratitude. It helps shift my focus. So I would say start 5 minutes at a time. That's where I started before I ever got to a point where I could take 2 and 3 days. I started at the place where it was 5 minutes here and 10 minutes there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple of moms, and I actually just talked to one a couple of weeks ago, and I love the comment that she made, exactly like you're talking about. And she said she does. She makes sure she takes 5 minutes sometimes for her, but the only place she can find her 5 minutes as she's going through everything is she goes into the bathroom and locks the door. And she has to lock the door, otherwise the kids come in. But she locks the door and she tells them, door's locked, it's my time.
Yeah.
And she can just sit and breathe.
Yeah.
And she said that has helped her so much. And she does some she started listening to some podcasts that just kind of help her, relaxing and breathing exercises. And that has just made a huge difference for her. Sometimes she'll actually sit there and paint her fingernails. She goes, I'm not going out, I'm not going anywhere, but it just feels good to have pretty fingernails, which I always feel too. But but it's something that simple. Taking 5 minutes to take care of yourself, and it's okay to lock the kids out for a period of time. And that's not being a bad parent.
The other thing that I don't think we often think about, but we're teaching our kids how to handle difficulties in their life, how to handle an overwhelming number of things. Many of our kids have anxiety and, have sensory issues and other things. And we want to give them tools and strategies to work through their own lives. We model that for them, and we don't realize sometimes we don't do as good a job as we would like to do. If they follow, our example, it's not always going to help them wind up in a good place. So, when we look at it that way, sometimes we don't want to take care of ourselves because we feel like it's selfish. But we are setting an example for our children, and sometimes thinking about it from that perspective will help us recognize the value of what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think just self-care really is a form of acknowledging our finiteness, right? And that doesn't make it selfish, that makes it more reality centering, right? And which actually can help us on a path to godliness a whole lot more than living in some illusion, right? I mean, we're supposed to live in the truth, right? The truth is that we're finite, limited people. And so we have to live with rhythms in life like finite, limited people. And I'm terrible at that. Partly because I'm not great at rhythms in general, right? I think I was really organized person until I had my kids. And then it's like it all went out the window. And now I just feel like I've become so adapting to what people need that I have to learn to go back to go, nope. This is my space. This is my time. That's part of what this office remodel was about, right? That my husband did for me. This is my space in here, not just for work, but also for being contemplative, right? And the other thing is just having fun too. Everybody has a need to have a certain amount of fun. That doesn't sound spiritual at all, but actually it's part of being human. I would have loved to hear. I'm sure Jesus laughed really hard at good jokes, right?
Absolutely.
But it's so restorative to just have a good laugh, to just do something just that's utterly purposeless, right? And I think just I think what's hard amongst my friends, it seems like I'm the initiator of that stuff, right? So if I'm not up to it, it doesn't happen. But if I am up to it, I'm the one one that starts making the phone calls like, time to go bowling because it's really fun to watch everybody do something they're not good at. Right? So anyway, so I think that's
and the thing with the self-care, most of the things we're talking about doesn't cost money.
no.
So, it's just being dedicated and giving time to yourself. The only real cost is you being dedicated to find time to give to yourself, to treat yourself, and know it's okay to take time away from your kids to give to you. And here's the bottom line, which I finally had to realize for myself. If I wasn't in a good place, there's no way I could take care of my kids to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
And so I needed to do that for myself in order to help my kids to do well.
Yeah.
At the same time, as a ministry leader, I needed to do that for myself so that I could then pour into other families, so I could pour into our volunteers and everyone else. Because if I'm empty, I have nothing to give out.
Yeah.
And everyone around you knows.
Yeah.
So it's finding that passion and just find something you're passionate about and make sure you're doing that and help fill your tank. Too many times we're doing the things that drain our tank and we're going on empty. We need to find things that fill our tank and do that over and over and let others around us know what fills our tank. And maybe if there are things that really do drain our tank, maybe we can find someone else who that may fill their tank and we can get them to do it.
That's a really good point, because I think, especially if you've been in disability ministry from the more pioneering level, right? We sort of had to learn how to do everything because there weren't that many people doing things at that point. It's really important at this stage to go, what am I actually good at, right? And it's really, and that's what I think you were alluding before in my fuel source thing, Doc, to a chart I had shared with you, right? Where we talk about that we run best when our engine is filled with the fuel of the love of God, and we're centered in we are expressing our God-given gifts and not trying to do stuff we're not particularly good at. It doesn't mean that you don't have to do things. All of us have to do things we don't like, right? But if our wheelhouse is 80% in things we're not good at or we don't like, it's going to just suck the life out of us, right? So part of delegation is humility, right? Saying, you know what, there are people that are a whole lot better at this than me. So carry on. So
it's why God didn't give everybody all the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah.
We all have different gifts. Everyone's got a different gift so that we can all use them together. We're supposed to come together. But then that's the same way with families and friends. We can rely on one another and come together. Because you know what? I know there are people that love to do the things that empty my tank. And I find them and I'm like, oh, God bless you.
Yeah.
But guess what? What drains their tank, I love doing.
Yeah.
And so we just have to go through with that.
Can I say one more thing? I think you really picked up on individualism in this, right? It's really easy to say, I'm being too much of a Lone Ranger. It's my fault this happened, right? and there may be some honest, repentant truth to that any of us have to deal with, right? But there's also, we live in a very individualistic culture where figuring out how to collectively do the ebbs and flows of life together as family and friends is very challenging, right? And in the environment we've been in the last couple of years, it's super challenging. And so I think just constantly being aware of that, not just us, but the people we do life with, all holding each other accountable to learning to live more collaboratively as possible, right? Interdependent versus independent. And that's becoming increasingly challenging, I think. So. Absolutely. But we are coming to the top of the hour here. Hard to believe. Let me just make a couple of announcements, and while I'm doing that, I'll give you guys a chance to think of a parting shot of what you want to leave everyone with.
This is going to be our final Talk with Doc for 2022. We're going to take off a couple of weeks for Christmas. So before I go any farther, I want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Our next Talk with Doc will be actually January the 15th. I'm very excited for that one. I'm going to be partnering with Jocelyn Ramos Campbell, and the two of us are going to be talking on how to do disability ministry through the eyes of a parent. And I think that's so important that sometimes, especially those who are not parents doing disability ministry, doing both, those who are doing disability ministry but not parents of a child with a disability, it's important to understand what life is like through the eyes of a parent and view ministry that way. And we're going to be touching on all that and going through that. Other things with SOAR, we encourage you to go to our YouTube page. We'll have this up on our YouTube page later. Make sure you subscribe and follow. We've got all kinds of things for you to be following with. If you are in the greater Kansas City area, one great way to help with self-care is allow us to give you respite. We, on a monthly basis, go all over the greater Kansas City area doing respite for families. We take all individuals, all ages, all diagnoses, all severities. And then for anyone who's listening to this on a monthly basis, we do a virtual respite. And we know that's not right for everyone, but it might give you a little bit of a break where you may just be able to sit in the room and do something yourself while we can entertain your child of any age. So you can learn all about that going to our website, soarspecialneeds.org. Also, just in time for Christmas, we just got a bunch of new merch. We got sweatshirt, we got some tumblers, if you like, license plate holders. You can contact us if you're interested in any of those. Make some great stocking stuffers or some gifts if you'd like that. So with that, coming back to everything, Lisa, let me go to you. What kind of parting shots would you like everyone to remember when talking about how to prevent exhaustion and burnout?
Probably just that we are stewards of the life that God has given us. And this was something I had to learn. I am a steward of one life and one physical body and one ministry. And how I steward that reflects what's valuable to me, and it reflects Jesus Christ to other people. And so this is something that I have continued to come back to as a way to ask myself the question, am I stewarding my life and the way I do things? Am I stewarding my body and how I'm taking care of myself? Am I stewarding the ministry in a way that reflects Christ and leads people back to him?
Yeah, that's good. Steph, you're up.
I would just encourage parents out there to check your altitude. Do an altitude check. Attitude check is good too, but altitude check is important because it's kind of like the frog in the kettle, right? It can sneak up on you. A descending altitude can sneak up on you without seeing it. So figure out how to just do an altitude check for yourself. Talk to your trusted friends and see what their observations are about how you're doing. Sometimes the people that love us well see us more accurately than we can see ourselves, right? Ask for help sooner rather than later, right? The later it gets, the angrier you'll be, the harder it is, right? So and then recognize it's an act of being human to receive that help, not an act of failure, right? So accept it as a gift of grace, and most of all, finally keep relying on God's grace in your life, God's love that never runs out of fuel, right? And the depths of that for you to be the fuel in your heart. So.
Yeah, that's great. So, it's been a great day. We could talk on this topic for a while. There's so many great things, we could do, but I really appreciate both both of you, Lisa and Steph, for joining us today. If anyone has any other questions, you can reach us at info@soarspecialneeds.org, and I'd be happy to pass it on to Steph and Lisa, and they're both phenomenal. They'll get back in touch with you, and they'd be happy to talk with you and help with you if you need to talk or anything. So just let us know, reach out to us, and we'd help you out with that. But again, Merry Christmas to both of you. Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year to everyone listening. And come soar with us. You all have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye.